Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to this quarter's Program Integrity Pulse webinar titled Sequencing Investigative Activities for Greater Provider Impact. I'm Warren Lesniewski, Vice President of Product Marketing here at Cotiviti. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'll have our esteemed fraud, waste, and abuse leader, Erin Rutzler, introduce herself and to her team members in a minute. But first, I need to go through our disclaimer really quickly. The contents of this presentation, both written and oral, are not to be construed in any way as legal advice. This presentation is for informational purposes only. So enough of that, let's get to the content and hand it over to Erin. Take it away.
Thanks, Warren, and good afternoon, everyone. As Warren mentioned, I'm Erin Rutzler. I'm the Vice President of Fraud, Waste, and Abuse with Cotiviti. Today, I have two of our amazing investigators with us, Brittany Eberhardt and Whitney Organ. They are both senior investigators with our Cotiviti SIU team that conduct both pre and post-pay FWA investigations on behalf of our clients. In addition to having rhyming names, Brittany and Whitney have also worked together since 2014. They first worked together at the Ohio Medicaid Fraud Control Unit and also worked for a national health insurance plan before happily landing at Cotiviti. So I'm very excited for them to join us today. They have some great content for us to discuss. So in terms of objectives, we have three main objectives that we'd like to cover with you today. The first is to understanding how sequencing of investigative activities will increase positive behavior. The second is to learn how Cotiviti's SIU is achieving positive results utilizing an end-to-end FWA approach. And then finally, hearing about best practices for yielding more FWA prevention in 2023. And so how are we going to accomplish those goals today? We will provide an overview of the process and benefits of simultaneous prepay and postpay reviews. We will also discuss the simultaneous prepay and postpay reviews as it relates to investigative sequencing and when to take those intervention points. We will also go through leading indicators and tracking of behaviors and modifications to those behaviors based on the reviews that are being conducted. And then finally, the team's going to walk through some case examples to show you some of the benefits of the different approaches that we take and the outcomes of all of those. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brittany, who's going to walk through our first polling question. Brittany, take it away.
Thanks, Erin. I'm going to start off with our first polling question of the day. You'll see on your screen, it should have popped up for you. So if you could take a moment and select the best answer, that would be great. The question is, when you're investigating a suspect provider, what type of review are you implementing? Are you implementing a prepay review, a postpay review, both, or other/none? So again, go ahead and take a moment to select your answer. If you select other, please feel free to share your answer with us in the chat. We're always interested to see what you guys are thinking. And I'm really excited to see what answers you're going to select today. We've had an increased interest with our clients recently surrounding prepay. And so my guess is that the prepay is going to be the winning answer. And so I see a couple of you are still submitting, which is fantastic. And it really looks like a lot of you are implementing prepay and postpay reviews, which is really great. Whitney and I are going to share the following information with you guys and hopes that it can strengthen your investigations that you're already completing, or maybe we'll even introduce you to these reviews that you can realize how you can benefit from implementing it. Postpay looks like it's winning and leading the pack, but some of you are already submitting both and doing both, so that's fantastic too. So thank you so much for participating in our poll today. I'm going to go ahead and discuss investigative sequence with you. I do want to start us off by giving a good baseline. We have a wide variety of audience members attending our webinar today, and I'm going to level set us on how sequencing prepay and postpay investigations can really benefit what you have that you're working, and we're also going to take a look at what it means to implement those, and again, what the benefits are. Every company's policies and procedures are going to shape the way that each individual case review is completed, but the majority of investigators are going to have an investigative sequence that you're going to be following. And so agencies and investigators really benefit from having a uniformed approach that can be utilized for your investigations. Some of those benefits include compliance, audits, training of new staff, case management, and time efficiency when you're working your investigations too. The illustration on your screen is one of the most common starting approaches that investigators take to working their cases. And so cases start with detection. You're going to start by identifying the referral source and reviewing your allegation. This shapes what the case is going to look like and how it's going to be worked. The next step that you're going to take is to complete a high-level data analysis. You're making sure that your data supports the allegation that you've been tasked with investigating. You're identifying if your provider's billing behavior is current or if it's historical, because this is going to determine if you're going to utilize a prepay review, a post-pay review, or a combination of both. From there, you're going to conduct a risk assessment. You're going to need to identify your return on investment, what your at-risk dollar amounts look like, and your projected savings. You're also going to identify any compliance requirements that your investigation must encompass according to your company's policies, so that you're aware of those objectives and you're ensuring that you're meeting those objectives as well. And so now on to our second half of the investigative sequence. You'll want to draft your action plan. You'll determine your timeline for your case and what investigative tasks you're going to be completing. From there, it's time to start the investigation and kick it off. At this step, you're going to be completing your desk review, which has a lot of steps in there for you to do, as well as initiating a prepayment and or post-payment review. So you're going to get ready to initiate those record requests to the provider so that we can start having those records come in and start our reviews. You're also going to dig in deep to your data and do a very thorough data analysis to identify all of those issues so that you're applying the appropriate review. We're also conducting research regarding rules, regulations, policies, laws, anything that we see that's taking place in our providers' billings. We're going to make sure that we're supporting those with the rules or the regulations that we think are in violation. And so we're going to go ahead and compile those and get that meaty supporting evidence ready for the end of our case. You'll also complete any applicable field work and interviews at this stage if that's something that you do. And lastly, your final steps will be reviewing your findings and implementing next steps. You're going to be completing the medical record reviews, notifying the provider of claim determinations and findings, and you're conducting your provider education or outreach. You'll determine if it's time to close your case or if you have egregious findings. So there may be payments to recover or government referrals to draft at this stage, or perhaps you'll be moving towards terminating the provider from the network entirely. In some of the previous positions that I've held within the healthcare fraud realm, I had no idea that prepay or postpay were tools that could be used, and not only used and were beneficial, but they could take place before a case escalated to a criminal level. So since some of the audience members may be like how I was and had no idea of these tools, we're going to go ahead and take a moment to become familiar with what prepay is, what postpay is, and what that investigative process looks like when we utilize those. So what is prepay? Prepay is a tool that we utilize, and it takes place before the provider receives payment for a billed service. The claim and medical records are reviewed to determine if the provider should be reimbursed for the services it was billed. And so if we take a look at the prepay review process that the case goes through in conjunction to our investigative sequence, we see that it's pretty similar. We're going to go ahead and start with our review of our provider for fraud, waste, and abuse. We're going to conduct data analysis to identify suspect claims, procedure codes, billing patterns, misuse of modifiers or place of service. We're going to dig in and figure out exactly what it is that we want to dig into with our prepay review. We're going to identify projected savings and do the steps that we're required to do there as well. And at that point, we're ready to put our provider on prepay review. So we're going to start by pending suspect claims for review. And what that means is you're going to start flagging claims that you want medical reviews to happen on the records before it's decided if the claim should even be reimbursed as it was billed. So you're going to go ahead and draft your medical record requests and send those to the provider, and those records will start to trickle in and medical record reviews will take place on those. We're going to complete our initial medical record review and we'll notify the provider of our findings. And while that's going on, we're going to continue to monitor our provider's billing behavior to see if it adapts, if it changes, if our negative behavior increases or decreases throughout the life of the prepay review, and we'll process appeals as applicable. And from there, we evaluate for our next steps. And so now that we know what prepay is, what's postpay? Postpay is when a reviewer makes a claim determination after a claim has already been paid. Postpay review results in either no change in the initial determination on a claim or a revised determination, indicating that an overpayment or an underpayment took place. And if we take a look at our postpay review process, we already notice right off the bat that it's extremely similar to what we're going to do on the prepay side. There's a lot of steps in there that we can double up and do both reviews, because if we're already going to do it for our prepay, we could also implement it for our postpay review under one investigation. So we're already going to start off our case by reviewing the suspect provider for fraud, waste, and abuse, identifying claims of concern. So sometimes you'll use a targeted sample, other times you may do an SVRS. We'll also identify our at-risk amounts and request those medical records from the provider for the selected claims. We'll complete those initial medical record reviews and monitor the provider's billing behavior until we get to the point that we notify the provider of the findings. And then again, we'll process appeals and recover overpayment and evaluate for our next steps. So as we saw, prepay and postpay reviews have a lot of similar actions to be completed through the life of the investigation. So what happens when we use them simultaneously? Let's take a look at how prepay and postpay reviews can be integrated into one investigation. Both prepayment and postpayment reviews involve requesting medical records and completing reviews on those records you obtain. When you complete both reviews simultaneously, you'll see the whole picture of the provider's billing behavior instead of just a snippet of it. This helps you to identify if the provider is engaging in fraudulent, wasteful, or abusive billing behaviors, and what your exposure looks like, and how long this has been going on for. Like our illustration shows, prepay reviews can feed our postpay reviews, and our postpay reviews can feed our prepay reviews, which results in a very thorough review of the provider. You can integrate the review at virtually any stage of your investigation. The prepay and the postpay investigations were designed to work hand in hand to complete a comprehensive review of your provider. This way, you're identifying your good players and you're dealing with your bad players, but you don't have any blind spots because it's a comprehensive review. The main difference between prepay and postpay is the status that the claims are in when we are completing our reviews. Prepay claims have not been paid until the provider produces documentation to support the claims as they were billed. Postpay, however, those claims have already been paid, and we're reviewing the medical records to ensure that documentation substantiates the claims not only as they were billed, but as they were paid. Prepay and postpay reviews are conducted on entirely different periods of times. This allows you to ensure that you're only reviewing a claim line once while you're completing that end-to-end review of the provider. No double dipping is taking place on a claim. You will determine if this is a new billing behavior or if this is an ongoing billing behavior. That helps you to figure out what your next steps should be taken with the provider and how you're going to correct that action. Prepay and postpay reviews allow investigators to pinpoint the start of that inappropriate billing behavior, recover payments that have already been issued that should not have been, but we also are able to stop inappropriate payments from being issued in the first place. When you're using prepay and postpay together, you're being reactive and proactive. You're moving from just the standard pay and chase to actually correcting billing behaviors and stopping payments on FWA claims. So now that we know what prepay and postpay are and how they work together, we're going to determine where we should start with our investigations, and if we should start with prepay, if we should start with postpay, or if we should just dive right on in and do a simultaneous review of our provider. And the way that I make that determination, and in the best way that I found, is I'm going to go ahead and review my allegation. I'm going to look at the billing patterns that I saw in my data, as well as reviewing the potential schemes that I think that the provider may be engaged with. That's going to really help you figure out the route that your case should take. So if you start with a prepay review, you've requested records to see the here and the now for a provider. You'll identify denial codes, and this is really going to help you narrow in on the provider's billing behavior. You can then use those denial rationales to review in the reviews that you conducted to justify wanting to look back at the provider through that post-pay lens and conduct the review that way as well. Because chances are there's going to be claims that should have been not paid, however they were. So some examples of times where it's really beneficial to start your case with a prepay review would be if you're noticing a spike in utilization by your provider. If you're monitoring out-of-network claims, that can be a great tool for you to use as well. Or when we're looking at new providers that are just starting to bill health plans, we're ensuring that they're off on the right foot and that they're billing appropriately. You may also benefit from a prepay review for a provider who may be claim dumping, so that you can slow down the amount of claims that are being dumped in and paid out. Or if you're monitoring a new or updated billing policy to ensure that providers are adapting to these and understand the way that they need to be billing and should be paid for those. If you choose to start with a post-pay review, you'll complete a sample of the provider's paid claims, and you're going to select the claims that you're going to review. You'll identify the codes that the provider bills inappropriately and issues found in those records. You would want to complete a prepay review of the provider after you've done that post-pay review if you see that those behaviors haven't changed through the record reviews you've conducted. If it's ongoing, then that prepay tool is a great time to go ahead and step in and make adjustments there. Sometimes when you may post-pay first would be as if your case was initiated due to a member's complaint. If you have a member call your hotline and has issues with what they are seeing being billed to their insurance, this would be a great opportunity to post-pay and look at those claims instead of just jumping feet first into a prepayment. We want to go ahead and use that tool to hone in on what is going on in the claims and identify our issues there. You may also want to consider a post-pay review when you're investigating a provider that you found through the DOJ's briefs or NHCAA briefs as well. You may see that your company has exposure with that provider that wasn't included in those investigations. And so initiating a post-pay review of those claims would definitely be beneficial. And some examples of where you would just dive in with simultaneous reviews would be if you've conducted a thorough data analysis of a provider that's an outlier when you're comparing them to their peers, whether it be for utilization or payment amounts, or a provider that's billing that's on the exclusion list and is being paid for those claims. The benefit of utilizing both prepay and post-pay reviews is that we're correcting and we're stopping suspect providers from inappropriately billing behaviors. Requesting records under one case oftentimes also creates less provider abrasion, which I think we all can agree we love when there's less provider abrasion. There's less going back and forth over a long period of times with the provider. We're requesting records, denying payment, having to meet with them, and them feeling like we're just picking on them or finding a reason. We're taking all of the issues and we're looking at the provider as a whole. We're looking at all of the claims, and then we are addressing them all under one investigation. You're taking all your denial codes, your records, all the available information at once, instead of through long multiple investigations. You're also completing one review of historical and current claims to review and correct all the issues identified within that provider's billing history, instead of just ones that you'll sometimes see through a limited review. You're stopping the bad behaviors, but you're letting the good behaviors continue as well with the provider. By completing a more straightforward investigation, health plans have a higher probability of a positive change in the provider's billing behavior because prepay and postpay provides more information that health plans can use for their provider education piece. You'll have multiple claim examples that can be utilized when designing a comprehensive correction plan with the provider too. Being straightforward and giving the provider all the issues that you've identified with their billing behaviors at once allows the provider to remediate these issues quicker. This is good business practice because you're creating better working relationships with the provider and less abrasion with them as well. You're also streamlining your investigations for efficiency and maximum results, and you're also limiting the amount of time that suspect claims are being paid. Again, one of the biggest benefits of using prepay and postpay together is that we're being proactive and reactive. We're recovering our maximum amount of payments for improperly billed services. We're also stopping those payments from being issued in the first place. When health plans work both review types jointly, they really get the opportunity to also do some internal evaluation. They have the opportunity to put new safeguards in place, update existing billing policies, or create entirely new policies based on trends that may have been uncovered through the result of these investigations. And lastly, utilizing both of these reviews really strengthens the evidence that we're sending off to our government referrals. The more evidence you include in your referral helps government agency partners build stronger and successful criminal cases. Claim determination letters with denial information, corrective action plans, provider education, these are all great documents that law enforcement can use to show intent. And as we know, intent is one of the key pieces that law enforcement has to prove in their criminal cases.
I'm really excited to take this opportunity to talk to you a little bit more about those behaviors that we do see around prepay and postpay, and talk a little bit about why they're so crucial to the outcomes of our investigations. So when these providers are placed on either prepay or a postpay review, it's imperative to track and monitor their reaction to these rules. Most providers are familiar with requests from insurance plans, and they expect that they're going to be asked to participate in these record reviews as a normal course of business. As requests are being sent out to these providers, we should anticipate that providers who are engaging in appropriate business practices will comply with these requests with little to no hesitation. During and after the reviews, it's expected that the provider may ask questions or even request meetings like peer-to-peers to better understand our plans and our coverage policies. Anticipating that the provider may disagree with findings and proceed through an appeals process is pretty normal and it's common, so it should not be an indicator that your provider is misbehaving. The provider may request and engage in regular and active communication throughout these processes, and we encourage you to be open to this. It may help to smooth these processes, especially for your good providers. As Brittany discussed earlier, that clear communication is more likely to have positive results in our prepay and postpay reviews and lessen provider abrasion. There are, however, multiple behaviors that could indicate that these providers are bad actors. And when we see these behaviors, we should consider further evaluation almost immediately. Failure to fulfill or comply with records requests, especially if we have sent multiple requests, is a clear sign that our providers may be stalling or just simply not interested in being good partners with our plan. If the provider has not been paid and they've not reached out to the plan to determine why they're not being paid, take this as a serious red flag to your SIU. Your provider should be very closely examined at this point. Keep in mind that if this occurs, we do recommend considering the expansion of your current prepay and postpay review to capture additional services, even up to all services the provider is billing. The provider being okay with not being paid is likely an effort to minimize the attention they're receiving. However, it should impact directly the opposite, and it should result in a more careful overview of the provider. So if your provider has stalled or failed to provide records for an extended period of time, make sure you have policies in place for how you're going to handle this. Are you going to accept records at all, even if they're coming in late? Or are you going to tech deny claims and instead demand repayment? Be sure that you plan ahead for these obstacles at the front end of your investigation, so you know how to communicate with providers. This allows you to inform them of the consequences of failing to participate, but also keeps all of your internal teams on the same page. Be sure you also have a method to track your records requests, and once you've confirmed that your provider has started to receive these requests, begin watching for those changes. Watch for changes in billing. Does the provider begin to change coding or diagnoses? Are there spikes or declines in the billing? Or does the provider stop billing altogether? A wonderful indication of our knowledge of wrongdoing is when they start billing correctly. Has this started happening? In some instances, you may see where providers start billing different services in order to completely circumvent system edits and avoid their claims being pended to these rules. For example, does a lab stop billing for genetic testing and begin billing for general health panels instead? These general health panels are not likely to be a part of your system edits because they're billed frequently and they're not commonly abused by providers. These providers are smart and they know this, so they're going to try everything. These providers' unexpected behaviors are going to confirm to your health plan that you're on the right track, that you've identified a provider who, at the very least, needs your attention and your education. Be mindful of the fact that these unexpected changes in the provider should be carefully documented, as these are indicating the provider has knowledge and intent of the wrongdoing. As Brittany said, this is a knowledge piece is going to be crucial for our law enforcement partners to successfully pursue criminal cases if and when needed. By actively tracking our provider's response to prepay or postpay, you can identify systemic issues that you may not have known otherwise existed. For instance, if a provider is on prepay for a urine drug screen and the medical reviews indicate that the provider has failed to conduct presumptive testing prior to utilizing that definitive testing, it's shed light on what is actually happening with your provider right now. This can immediately result in provider outreach and provider education. Provision of this instruction is directly impacting the provider's care to your members. It also ensures payments are not being made unnecessarily to the provider, and you're stopping the bleed on the front end. Prepay monitoring may lead to the identification of additional records and coding that need to be immediately reviewed and done and taken care of through a post-pay process. Using that previous drug screening example, it may be necessary to conduct a review of additional records to determine whether there has been an overpayment to the provider. These at-risk dollars are financial loss to our company and need to be identified. By tracking these providers' behaviors and carefully documenting their response, your extrapolated overpayments at the end of an investigation will also be fully supported and come full circle. Again, when utilizing the drug screening example, if your provider was not completing presumptive testing, and as soon as you implemented a rule or review, began implementing presumptive testing without prompting and without education, it shows that provider had knowledge of how to bill appropriately from the beginning. This provider made a conscious decision not to abide by coverage policies or rules. Furthermore, if a provider is educated on how to bill correctly during your review and continues to bill incorrectly, there's support for further action on the part of your plan now due to the clear knowledge of bad actions. By tracking the reviews and utilizing clear communication with this provider, you can successfully initiate positive behavior changes gradually and over time. In your prepay space, you'll see this as claims are approved and paid rather than being denied. And in the postpay space, we'll see this as they're not being asked to repay services once our reviews are complete. Finally, tracking those error rates through the reviews can be an important metric to discuss internally, but can also be important for when you have peer-to-peer discussions with your providers, or even at the end of a settlement negotiation. Error rates can help you determine whether you should continue to keep a provider under review, or if you can remove that provider from a rule or stop requesting additional records. So now is a perfect opportunity to discuss what's going to happen once we've determined it's time to remove that provider from the rule. When a provider's been taken off of review, our work doesn't stop. It's important to continue to monitor these behaviors and how the provider's responding. Make sure you have a set period to go back and review claims. You can go back 90 days, 6 months, or even a year and see how your provider is performing. Complete a data analysis and look at those trends, and they're going to show you whether that person or that provider has reverted back to bad habits. Did they begin utilizing higher paying codes or known problem codes? Are they trending in an unexpected direction? Quality assurance checks may also include internal data systems that will help you spot check billing behavior in codes. Are they using codes that are outside of their specialty or codes that they shouldn't be using at all? For example, is a lab billing genetic testing after they have been educated they do not have the proper equipment and were told to stop? Or is a pain management provider billing drug screens at a high rate again? Consider whether your plan is able to initiate an occasional or random records request to complete compliance reviews. This will tell you how they're behaving. This will also help you understand if you need to take further investigative steps. Do you need to complete member interviews or go on an on-site review? Ultimately, our goal is to achieve long-lasting and positive behaviors from these providers, regardless of whether we implement a prepay rule or a post-pay rule. Rules are deemed successful when they result in the provider requesting guidance or education and employing that in our future business practices. They're going to effectively draft and comply with corrective action plans, not simply draft them and set them on a shelf. They're going to implement that appropriate behavior and stop inaccurate and unnecessary billing. Additionally, we want to see that these providers continue to use appropriate billing practices while maintaining medical records according to our plan rules, our guidelines, and CMS regulations. When the provider is avoiding wasteful or unnecessary services, it results in confidence that our plans members are receiving the best possible care, but also that we're minimizing that financial risk for our companies. So now we've had an opportunity to better help you understand how utilizing prepay and postpay may help you establish those better relationships with your providers, but also change their behaviors. We're really excited to show you how these have helped us successfully shape our investigations. So I'm going to turn this back over to Brittany to kick off our case study section.
Thanks, Whitney. I'm now going to take us into our last section, which is the case studies. It's always my favorite section to get to when you actually get to see these things applied and what the outcomes were. So we're going to go ahead and present you guys with 3 different case studies today. We're going to do one prepay case example, one postpay example, and one case that implemented both prepay and postpay. And so I'm going to go ahead and start us off with our prepay case example first. So our first example, our prepay case example, involved an internal medical physician that was identified for overutilization of allergy testing and antigen preparation, as well as billing antigen preparation for immunotherapy, but was not administering immunotherapy. The provider was billing a high average number of medical tests per patient, and they were also billing excessive non-invasive vascular diagnostic studies. 99.4% of the patients receiving tests from this provider received the exact same battery of tests. And we were able to identify that boilerplate billing was occurring with these codes. We decided to go ahead and place the provider on prepay review for the 5 procedure codes that you can see there on your screen. And we calculated our 12-month projected savings to be a little bit over $63,000. The provider stopped billing and or stopped utilizing CPT 95923, 93921, and 93923 extremely early into the prepay review. So early that we did not actually pull in one single claim line for any of these 3 codes during the entire review process. We were, however, able to review 75 claim lines that the provider did actually submit records for. The reviews were only for the allergy-related codes, the CPT 95004 and the 95165. All the claims were denied and were not substantiated by one single record that the provider submitted to us. As you can see, the denial rationales are on your screen. We had issues with missing, invalid, and incomplete documentation that was submitted for the claims. Documentation did not reflect the level of services that were billed, and documentation did not meet the specifications of the health plan policies that also mirrored CMS, LCDs, MCDs, and all the other policies out there as well. And so some examples of the issues that we identified within the records included clinical documentation and results were not present to support the procedure was even performed. We were unable to verify the date of service because the date of interpretation for the tests was documented as occurring prior to the test date, which made 0 sense at all. We had issues with that. The documentation did not support the criteria for allergy testing was even met. So the provider did attempt to appeal 7 of the claim line denials, and all of the claim lines remained denied. The provider's error rate was 100% through the life of the prepay review, and provider education was implemented in conjunction with continuing that prepay review because obvious issues were identified that needed corrected with the provider. The high error rate associated with the medical review for this provider also warranted further analysis, as consistent billing issues may indicate systemic issues and potential fraud, waste, and abuse for consideration for government referrals. Savings we had just a little bit over $26,000 for just the 2 CPT codes for the limited review time that we conducted that prepay review. And the bottom line for this case is we needed both prepay and postpay review in order to complete a comprehensive review of our suspect procedure codes for this provider. First off, the provider's error score was 100%. There's a really good chance that previously paid claims should not have been paid and would not be substantiated if we actually had the opportunity to do a medical record review. Post-pay reviews would also be beneficial, especially on the procedure codes the provider abruptly stopped billing. So we could see if services were appropriately billed or even rendered appropriately. As Whitney shared with us earlier, it's a red flag when the provider stops billing the codes extremely abruptly, and we could not review them simply through a prepay review alone. Recovering overpayments and evaluating for back sweep opportunities would also be supported for this case because there was $26,000 in savings as a result of our prepay investigation. What we learned from this case, and what you could learn from it too, is that sometimes a provider is going to change their billing behaviors when they realize that they're on review. And prepay review needed to be used in conjunction with a post-pay review if we were going to have the opportunity to complete an end-to-end review of the provider's billing behavior. And so now Whitney is going to share with us our post-pay review example.
Thanks, Brittany. So during a recent investigation, a COVID-19 drive-through testing site was flagged after it was noticed that they were billing for place of service as a mobile unit, but billing for evaluation and management services on 100% of their patients. These evaluation and management services accounted for 69% of the total billing for the drive-through site, despite expectations that more than half of the billed claims should have been for COVID-19 testing. Evaluation and management services were being billed at codes 99214, 99215, as well as 99204 and 99205. For those of you who are unfamiliar with these codes, in order to request reimbursement, our providers should spend greater than 30 minutes with the patient or document the use of moderate to high complexity in their decision-making. It's unlikely that either of those things would occur in a drive-through testing environment. Most of us visited a facility like this during that public health emergency, and we know that these drive-throughs were very quick, in and out, get your testing done, and move on. Another interesting aspect of this case was that the provider was splitting claims. One claim was being billed with the COVID-19 test, and the second claim would come in with that mid to high level evaluation management service. It should be noted that when these claims are split in this manner, these providers might be trying to circumvent system edits that would deny a claim containing both codes. Ultimately, for this provider, we conducted a statistically valid random sample and requested 34 records. The provider was compliant with our records request and provided the documentation for all 34 of our claims. Ultimately, that review resulted in 46 claim lines being reviewed, with 41 of those claims containing findings. Those findings ranged from documentation that did not support the level of service billed to situations where the documentation did not support that an evaluation service had been rendered at all. A matter of fact, some of these high-level services were billed on patients who were entirely asymptomatic. Some of these patients had been tested simply so they would have test results for travel or to attend other special events. They would have had no need for an evaluation and management service, let alone one that required such high complexity. Additionally, through our review, it was noticed that the provider was billing for both PCR and antigen testing. However, in some cases, the records did not support that our antigen test had ever been completed. Overall, the investigation and subsequent reviews resulted in an extrapolated overpayment of over $1.4 million. There are several instances when a prepay and a postpay review together may work really effectively in order to identify a provider whose behavior is egregious in nature. So as Brittany discussed earlier, that prepay can help feed and direct our postpay, and our postpay can do the same for our prepay. So let's go ahead and discuss how this worked in another COVID-19 example. So during last summer, we were contacted by a member who had identified discrepancies in their explanation of benefits and was concerned that their plan had been billed for tests that had never actually been completed. The member's concerns resulted in a post-pay review of the provider. We sent records requests for the member's records along with 25 additional members who had similar testing claims. The records requests were sent via fax. And while that delivery showed that it was completed, there was no signature on our proof of delivery, which we like to have for record purposes. So we went ahead and reached out to this provider as a courtesy just to confirm that they had received these records. All of those calls, all of those voicemails went completely unanswered. So we decided we were going to take an extra step at this point in our investigation and be a little creative. We determined that we could research neighboring businesses and providers. We reached out to a neighboring physician and asked if they were familiar with this laboratory. The nurse who talked to us on the phone that day actually indicated she had never seen anyone enter the suite, and actually commented that while looking in the windows, it was very obvious that the suite had remained empty, despite the fact this laboratory running multitude COVID tests should be operating there. These statements, combined with our members' concerns and the lack of contact from our provider, resulted in a prepay rule being implemented the same day. Within days of that prepay rule being implemented, that provider claim dumped thousands of dollars in claims into our system in an attempt to be paid. Going back to talking about those unexpected behaviors, it's important to note here that that provider never did reach out to us to find out why they had not been paid. It was a lot of money to just let go. Within a few days, we noticed that an additional MPI number had started to bill for the identical members. So we went ahead and immediately pended these claims and stopped payments to those providers, as that was an immediate red flag that something was wrong. Research of these MPI numbers associated with the claims that were coming in and these members showed that one authorized agent was suspiciously listed as John Smith. A second was listed as an address pinned by Google Maps in the middle of a field, so it wasn't even a building or an office. Ultimately, we discovered these labs were phantom providers and had never actually existed at all. There was never equipment in these labs or these buildings, and there were never supplies purchased that would have aided in the testing of COVID-19. So while these leases were signed by this owner in order to look legitimate, the labs were never in business, and the offices all remained empty. The owner of these labs was actually a contracted lab technician who worked for a legitimate company, who went into a physician's office and stole patient information. He then used this stolen information to build multiple plans for COVID-19 testing and additional services that were never actually rendered. Ultimately, the Department of Justice just indicted this owner for nearly $7 million in fraud related to this scheme. By placing this provider on postpay at the inception of our investigation, it did tip the provider off to our knowledge that something was quite likely not right. In some cases, providers at this point will start to call and ask you questions about the review, but in this case, the provider stalled and ghosted us. By failing to answer or return our calls or even respond to the requests, we knew the provider was aware that the plan had either caught on to his scheme or that we were close to uncovering that these were false claims. This helped us know that we were on the right track. By taking the step to implement the prepay rule, our plan stopped additional money from going out the door, and that when the provider claim dumped in an effort to obtain whatever final payments they could grab, they were unsuccessful. As you've heard multiple times today, we've explained in multiple ways, utilizing that prepay and postpay together allows us to stop that bleed. We're being reactive, as Brittany said, but we're also being proactive in protecting not only our members, but we're protecting our plan and our financial interests. We really hope that these examples really bring home and show you how valuable the use of these tools really truly can be, and how crucial prepay and postpay together can be for your investigative steps.
All right. Thank you, Whitney and Brittany. What a great presentation today. I hope everybody got some great nuggets of information to take back to your teams. I wanted to take a moment to recap our main objectives that we outlined at the beginning of the presentation and talk through some key takeaways our team would recommend for best practices with sequencing investigative activities. And so our first objective that we wanted to hit with you all was how sequencing activities increases positive behavior. And so number one is, stopping that bad billing behavior and allowing good billing behavior to continue through a comprehensive investigation, which I believe the team really showcased through those case examples. The other that we talked quite a bit about, and it is a best practice that we would recommend, is using pre and post pay reviews together so that you're not only reactive, but you're proactive. So you're really stopping the bad billing up front. Another way is that combining pre and post pay reviews, it yields positive behavior changes that really expedites your investigative time and the provider responses that you're getting. Our second objective was, how our team is achieving positive results from an end-to-end FWA approach. And again, I think, main takeaways were through those case examples where we talked through the major impacts with those investigations that we recently conducted. But it really shows how we take a holistic review of suspect provider behaviors and package it into one straightforward investigation. The other is identifying and addressing all of the billing issues at once so that it's causing less provider abrasion. You're not going back and forth in multiple audits and multiple intervention points. You're really addressing the behavior all at once, because at the end of the day, part of the goal of the SIU is not only to investigate and determine if there's fraud, waste, and abuse in the system, but also to enable provider education and better benefits for your membership. And because at the end of the day, it's not the detection piece, it's really the prevention piece. Best practices for yielding more prevention in 2023, these are some of the big ones. And Whitney just highlighted that as well for the polling question, is combining pre and post pay reviews together to streamline your process. It creates an efficiency for your team, less abrasion, and more results more quickly. Correcting the aberrant behavior by looking at historical and current claim reviews. So this really goes with the pre and post together, but during your data mining process, you can accomplish both of these goals and keep on top of the billing and just looking at the monitoring of the behavior changes over time. And then finally, evaluating your internal opportunities to make updates to billing policies or edits, or putting new safeguards in place to track the behavior and then be more preventative as you move through your investigative process. So again, these best practices are really meant to supplement your existing process to not only optimize provider education, but to implement more preventative measures to make a greater impact. So we really hope that what we shared with you today can help strengthen your current capabilities, leading to greater impact in 2023.